Iran. We know that things have been going on and sanctions are probable. But how effective and how much of UN is going to be part of that before it become like a US-Iran thing? And my second question is, there's a lot of dictatorship, and as the ambassador Nambiar have mentioned earlier, right now 95% of wars are within countries, and we know that most of those wars are in Africa. How, what are the United Nations doing now, and what they plan to do in the near future to reduce those internal wars? Thank you.
National corporations, global compact, etc.
Well, yes, transnational corporate, it's a very interesting thing. The whole, in the, around 25 years ago, you used to have the commission on, the Committee on Transnational Corporations. Strangely enough, the world has changed a great deal since then, and today you have a different approach to the involvement of the corporate sector in multilateral affairs. Increasingly, you are finding that the corporate sector has taken a proactive view rather than have a code of conduct preventing the activities of transnational corporations in certain areas. Now you have what is called a global compact, where increasingly you are talking of corporate governance, you're talking of transparency. Transparency in terms of the activities, etc., and a system of reporting and involvement with the United Nations, which, in a sense, enhances the role of the corporate sector in a manner which, in a sense, subscribes to a global, a consensus idea of what is global corporate citizenship. So you have actually evolved from the earlier negative kind of list of involvement of corporations into what may be called a positive list of what corporations should be doing proactively. To an extent, this is also because the world has changed. I think there is increasing acceptance of the role of corporations in the development of economies, but at the same time, I think some of the, let's say, the difficulties that countries have faced with regard to the operations of corporations have not actually gone away. They've just been transmuted. To an extent, I think the corporations have succeeded in the post-Cold War, particularly in recent years, in changing the universe of discourse. And that, I think, is probably more an aspect of perception management. The issues relating to national ownership, the importance of setting guidelines, etc., are still there, but they are basically in the national domain. Now, the other question relates to
Iran's effectiveness of sanctions.
Effectiveness of sanctions in Iran. Now, or against Iran, you do know, well, in a sense, ultimately, sanctions can only be effective if these are observed universally. To an extent, to say that the Security Council can adopt resolutions invoking sanctions. But even there, the first big hurdle to go through is to find all the permanent members agree to the adoption of sanctions regime against a country like Iran, and that has not been the case so far. Though just few days, in fact, even yesterday, there has been news that there is discussion between the United States and China on how to move ahead with respect to getting a slightly stronger regime, or being able to persuade Iran to move in terms of meeting the international concerns with regard to non-proliferation concerns. But it is still not there, and even if you were to get to a regime of sanctions adopted in the Security Council, to actually implement it is not going to be that easy, particularly for a country as big and with the kind of economic, let's say, the economic potential which Iran has. There will be many countries which will have very important economic links with Iran, who will be very chary about getting completely, in a sense, to implement the entire regime of sanctions. I think it will eventually be still unstable, and ultimately it has been seen that sanctions have never really been fully effective. They've served as an important element of pressure, and I think that is the essential sort of object of sanctions regime. I don't think it can bring a nation to its knees, particularly a nation which is, as in a sense, almost capable of a fair amount of self-subsistence, as it were, as a country like Iran. I don't think a regime of sanctions is going to bring a country like Iran to its knees.
I'd like to add and play the devil's advocate, because I think there are some things that you must understand clearly. The first is that what we are talking about in Iran is non-proliferation. Now, non-proliferation is totally different from nuclear disarmament.
Yeah.
Nuclear disarmament means all nuclear weapons are bad, full stop. Nuclear non-proliferation means my nuclear weapons are good, yours are bad. And this is a totally discriminatory concept. And that is why it is immoral as a concept. Don't mix up the two. People try to describe non-proliferation as motherhood and apple pie. It is not. It's immoral and sinful in its discrimination as opposed to the concept of nuclear disarmament. That's point number one. Point number two, even in the non-proliferation treaty, which is a very imperfect treaty, you have Article 4, which says it is the inherent right of all states to use nuclear energy for peaceful purposes, which means that enriching uranium up to 20% is part of the legal right of all countries under the non-proliferation treaty. Iran is nowhere near 20%. It is not even at 5% at the moment. So it is strictly within the framework of the nuclear non-proliferation treaty. And so we have no evidence against Iran. We only have suspicions. And in law, you cannot base action on suspicions. You need evidence in order to base action. And so just passing these sanctions on the basis of suspicions, I'm afraid, is something that will be difficult to defend in front of the verdict of history. And to that then you add the third point which Ambassador Nambiar has brought forward, which is that it's a very big country. You're dealing with a country of 70 or 80 million people and a power with 6% of the world's total oil sales. It's not a minor country that we are dealing with. And so sanctions and threat of action, I'm afraid, is slightly short-sighted. You disagree?
Well, I was, as I said, as an ambassador of India, I may have probably agreed with a lot of what you said earlier, but as a member of the Secretariat, I think I have to hold my counsel in terms of some of the ideological sort of aspects of what you just said. But nevertheless, I think I do, well, I think it is, one has to be realistic. The country of the size of Iran, it is going to be difficult to institute. I mean, you can't barricade the whole of Iran from outside influence or contact. There's no way you can do it, quite frankly. But the fact of sanctions, even the threat of sanctions, does actually bring a certain seriousness to the consultations that take place between member states, between the UN, as it were, and the IAEA, etc., and Iran. And in that sense, I think it does serve a purpose. And it does actually bring, to an extent, I think, there is a possibility of having a contact, of being able to engage in a dialogue, a serious dialogue, on ways in which the needs for new nuclear energy, the exploitation of nuclear energy on the one hand, and the prevention of the diversion of this kind of these capabilities into the weapons area. It is possible to discuss that, and I think Iran needs to be brought to that kind of a track.
Let's come to the third question. You come from India, which is the example of democracy. I come from Pakistan, which is the example of dictatorship. Which of the two is better?